Okay, welcome to our fourth IZE reading group. I'm delighted to welcome a whole group of people that are going to talk through chapter 4, which is all about approaches and methods in conservation education. It's the 1st of December in Aotearoa, New Zealand, first day of summer, so that's great news. I know we've got people from all over the world, so you're probably going into winter time. But it's the end of the year, and just acknowledging all the work that both the IZE community and the IZE board have done in 2022. I know many of you watch this on our IZE YouTube channel, so thank you for watching, and do get in contact with us if you do have any questions. So a bit of housekeeping before we begin. So if you do agree to stay and participate in the session, it is being recorded. It does go on the IZE YouTube channel, and so you are agreeing to that participation and that recording. What we're going to do, the usual format is that we're going to have a great conversation about social change for conservation, the World Zoo and Aquarium Conservation Education Strategy. Each of the reading groups focuses on a chapter. As I said, this is the fourth one, so we're going to look at chapter 4. And if you have had a chance to have a read through before the session, do let us know any questions. So there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can raise your kind of hand on the Zoom functions, or you can pop your question in the chat. We have some questions that we think we know our membership might have at this time, so we're going to talk through those, but do feel that you can ask any of the questions that you'd like to. So when I think about how the strategy is structured, to me, chapter 4 is about the kind of the what and the how. So it is about the pedagogical, the behavioural, the communication tactics that we're using, the approaches to really deliver quality conservation education through our zoos and aquariums. And so where we begin with our questions is going to really think about that kind of big question: how on earth do we go about that? But before we get onto that, I'm going to do some introductions. We have 5, including myself, IZE board members on the call, and I'm really looking forward to chatting through this chapter. So we'll go around and I'll ask everybody to introduce themselves, and then we'll get going with the conversation. So Kim, do you want to kick us off by introducing yourself?
Sure. Good. It's afternoon my time. I am in St. Louis, Missouri in the United States, and Sarah's rubbing it in that it's summer there because I'm currently freezing where we're headed into winter. But my name is Kim. I am the secretary treasurer for IZE. Prior to that, I was the social media editor, and I work at the St. Louis Zoo, and we're so excited to have you all. I'm also doing some behind the scenes tech, so I'm pulling different links and stuff that might pop up in the chat. So if there's something that you'd like, please just let me know, and I'm happy to get that to you.
And
Thanks, Kim. Oh, over to you, Deborah.
Okay, sorry. Jumping right in. I'm Deborah Erickson. I am the past president of IZE. I live in balmy Southern California in San Diego. I oversaw interpretation at the San Diego Zoo for 20 years, and I just recently retired, but I'm still working at Atlantis Paradise Island. I run their foundation, Atlantis Blue Project Foundation, and I oversee all the interpretation at the Atlantis.
Thanks, Deborah. Judy.
Good evening, everybody from South Africa. I'm Judy Mann, and I'm the president of the IZE. I think it's the first time I've actually said that, so that's very exciting. Before that, I was president-elect, and before that, the journal editor and regional rep. It's great to have you with us here today, because this is really one of the key things that the IZE does. It supports its members in all aspects of education. So lovely to have you here. And I work at the Two Oceans Aquarium in Cape Town, but I live in balmy Durban at the moment. Ephantis.
Yes, my name is Ephantis Mugo. I work for Lewa Wildlife Conservancy. This is in Kenya, Africa. I'm currently the regional representative for Africa, and my role in Lewa is Conservation Education Program Coordinator, a program that we run in the Conservancy, has been running for the last 11 years. We host students and community members and engage them on various activities on conservation education and awareness. So I'm happy to share and learn from everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Fantas. So we're going to get going with our conversation. Now, this chapter has a lot in it. If you've had a read through, there's quite a lot of different chapters. But to me, where it begins is looking at how we think about measurable learning outcomes and how we think about key messaging, because that often is the foundation of how we want to communicate effectively the kind of work that we do in our organisations. So Deborah, I'm going to start with you. So you've had a long career in zoos and aquariums, worked on multiple different projects. Are there some top tips when you're thinking about embedding key messages, learning outcomes, and how you go about measuring them in your projects?
Yeah, I think that the key is that you, number one, you have to have all the key members that are going to be affected by the messaging at the table. Well, not all of them, but representatives from all of them, because it's got to be an inclusive process. You can't, I learned very early on, if you just have the interpreters at the table, you're going to have some issues. You need to make sure that you have representatives from the animal team and other areas, especially someone from public relations and communication. I think that was a really early learning, because in the beginning of my career, what would happen is the interpreters would sit down, we'd make the messages, and then the public relations people, they were communicating, and it had absolutely, it was like, you know, you were looking at two different organizations messaging, one for the communications team and one for the interpretation team. So what has been great at the San Diego Zoo was that the team was put together and the communicators and the interpreters worked together. So the messaging was the same. It didn't matter if it was in the press release and the website text, on the interpretive panels, or the people that gave the tours. Everybody had consistent messaging. And I think the second most important thing is, I always go by the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid, because when you have really complex messaging, people don't use it and people don't understand. So keep it really simple and try to narrow it down to the, you know, what do you want your visitors or those that take your education program, or go to your website when they're done with their experience, what do you want them to know when they're done? And you all have to agree upon that. And it can't be 10 things, can't be 7. I try to narrow it down to 4. So those are the two things that I think are most important.
Thanks, Deborah. And yeah, that really links, the first part links to the building a culture of conservation education, actually involving a lot of people, lots of different stakeholders across the organisation in how we construct those key messages. And then the second part, thinking about, you know, how you go about making them. And Judy, we'll come to you next to get your thoughts on this. You're saying, you know, don't do too many, make sure they're consistent. But I think some of our listeners would like to know more about how on earth do you go about thinking about all these different things to communicate? How on earth do we get to the kind of key messages, the kind of learning outcomes that an organisation can really get behind? And Judy, I know you've probably got some thoughts on this.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'll take the example of building Ushaka Marine World. We moved from an old small aquarium to a brand new big aquarium, and we had a series of 6 galleries. So the exhibit designers decided I was part of both teams, but so they decided what was going to go into which exhibit. So I work in an aquarium, and we've got an area which is shallow water, then we've got a turtle area and a rocky reef area. So we've got a whole lot of different areas. And we had to say what is going to be our message in each of those areas. And it was really, really hard, because exactly as Deborah said, the scientists and the aquarists said, well, we're going to be discussing the lateral line systems, or we're going to be discussing the deep meaning of the ecosystem, or we're going to be discussing camouflage, which is all really good and exciting. And we were saying, but what do we want our visitors to leave with? And it was difficult to find what we really wanted them to leave with. So we ended up with something that I learned in the conservation education training back in Wheeling, West Virginia, many years ago, which is looking at what was our big idea. So we found a big idea for each zone. And that big idea could be something like turtles are amazing ambassadors for the ocean, just for example, if that wants to be our big idea. And then out of that, we always work on inspire, connect, and empower. So we look at that animal as inspiring people. So that's the animal, and really a little bit of information and a little bit of messaging around, wow, turtles are just really cool for some reasons, whatever they are. Then the connecting, because often, especially for us in an aquarium, we're very distant. People are not marine animals. People live on land. We're terrestrial beings. How do we connect the life of a turtle to the life of a human? But turtles are actually one of those cool things, because sadly, turtles are so impacted by humans. So we can find that connection between a person's life and turtles, and then empowering them to do something about it. So we started to really bring in that empowering into all of our messaging as well. So people didn't just leave with a bit of knowledge, but we wanted them to leave with an emotional connection as well as a feeling of empowerment to do something. So we tried to do that for each of our zones and have separate messages. And then it's keeping it consistent, because then staff change and people change, and then they move the fish around, which also confuses you a little bit. So it's being flexible enough with the physical interpretive panels. So you can't design it and be precious about it, because it's not going to last forever. So how can you make sure that what you put up can be changed relatively easily? And that's something that we've had to adapt to do. At one stage, you could walk around our aquarium and go, this was the Kim phase, this was the Deborah phase, and this was the Aphantis phase, because you could see the interpretation was so different and the messaging was so different. So we've recently redone the whole process and gone through every single interpretive element in our whole aquarium and made it all consistent with a new set of messaging, which we redesigned with the team again. So yeah, hopefully that just gives you some insight as to how we've gone about it. Made lots of mistakes along the way, and we just keep learning.
Thank you, Judy. And that's a lovely kind of walkthrough example of how you can think about the diverse purposes and messages in your conservation education, and really links to chapter 2 when we had that conversation about how do you know what kind of purposes, what kind of outcomes you want to look at. And so having those cognitive ones, the knowledge, having the emotional ones, having the behavioral ones is a really great way to start thinking about what kind of messages and what kind of outcomes. So Aphantis and Kim, I'm going to come to you next, because kind of leading from that, we've got our messages, we're thinking about outcomes, but we have a very different and diverse group of people that we're trying to connect to. So Aphantis, I'll come to you first, but how do you go about thinking about making it intellectually, culturally, socially inclusive to those diverse audiences? You've got those key messages, but how do you make sure you're connecting with a wide group of people?
Yes, Salah, one of the, just like I mentioned on our development of the Conservation Education Center, which is a center that is meant to host students and also as well communities. We rarely have foreign tourists for the center, because the center is really specifically meant to reach out to the students and communities. So one thing, it is all started from the design. I would say I designed the center myself, and but I had an experience with in conservation education delivery for 7 years before I did this. And one of the things I had learned before was the idea of keeping it simple, just like Deborah mentioned, was very key. And somebody told me that less is more. And this is when you have less information in your panels, then you are able to communicate. When you have so much information, then you don't communicate. And for me to be able to have my content, be able to reach several people, I have used posters that have minimal text, but have guiding questions, whereby the questions probe the audience to be able to try to learn something from the exhibit that we are trying to demonstrate. For example, did you know? So we want the student, the audience, the learners to find out, what is this that I might not know? And in the process, it might be, did you know that about the bees, for example, did you know that for bees to make a kilogram of honey, they need to visit 2 million flowers? It creates a lot of curiosity, and then it ignites questions. And that is one of the things that we feel it encourages participation. The other thing is that the positioning of the exhibits, I would say we use the child level. That is, we do less than 1 meter from the ground, whereby we are able to accommodate the young learners and everybody. And we have trained as much as possible in our Conservation Education Center setup to ensure that all the audiences are able to interact with the exhibits, either visually, they can be able to see, and some they can be able to touch, because again, this is what we are provided at the Education Center. Otherwise, my program will have the sessions at the Education Center and guided game drives, where we have now to have an opportunity to get our runners to the field. So having them being able to see, being able to touch, being able to have probing questions, then encourages participation. And we are able actually to have some that are open-ended to create curiosity, and audiences are able to ask from that.
Great, thank you so much, Aphantus. And yeah, that really makes the link between, you can have great content, great messaging, but as Aphantus talked about, really thinking about how you're positioning your interpretation, what kind of framing, what kind of enabling environment are you putting into your exhibit design to be able to really connect with diverse audiences to help kind of drive that conservation education effectiveness. So Kim, over to you. What kind of thoughts have you got on this?
I think a lot of reinforcing what's already been said, keeping it simple. I think too, you have to think about what is your delivery method, and if I'm doing a broadband webinar to the public that isn't as interactive as perhaps talking with a family group one-on-one, that's going to change how my messaging is being delivered. Aphantus kind of touched on that, where, thinking about your age group and stuff. So I think really thinking about not only your audience from the get-go and the big idea, but also what is the delivery method? Is it a sign? Is it an interactive program? Is it a virtual program? Is it an in-person program? I think a lot of that's going to play onto it. And then also being responsive in the moment. We all know you can go in with the best laid plans, but if you're picking up that your audience, maybe they seem bored, so maybe you need to take it up. I'm going to put up in quotes there, but you need to ratchet it up, or they're not quite getting it, so you need to step back. And so I think by engaging your audiences and reading them and being reactive to their needs is going to have a much stronger message than just trying to say, I'm going to hit these 3 bullet points that are on my outline. That may not work, and you have to be okay with that. You have to be flexible and responsive.
Thanks, Kim. We're going to stick with you because I'm really interested in then having a conversation about where do we draw our knowledge from about these approaches. So in the chapter, it talks about, underpinning theories, drawing from different kind of behavior change models, pedagogy kind of approaches. Kim, thinking about you and your team and even the entire organization, how do you draw from those external sources to underpin and create a foundation for your conservation education?
Oh, that's a great question, Sarah. And I wish we had time to do more of it. So we do work a lot internally and cohesively to draw on those resources. Like you said, we have what I would call our early childhood expert. And so if we're developing a program that is maybe for that audience, we will go to them for guidance on, hey, here's what we're thinking, and getting that input. Same for a teen program or a family program. We're also going to work a lot with teachers for school groups, we'll go to them and say, well, what are you studying? We have a program called Mathimals, I'll give as an example. And it's all about how we use math in our zoo setting to teach those standards. So I'm thinking school programs here, but as we all know, in the United States, well, I'll say first grade. I'm not sure how that translates to other countries, but a first grader at the beginning of the school year has a very different understanding of math as a first grader at the end of the school year. So we have to talk with the teacher and say, where are they? What are your concepts? What are they studying? And so the program can even change in the moment. In regards to kind of pedagogy, it's just taking that time to do that intentional research to look at what are the evaluations that are out there that we can draw from? What is the current landscape in the educational setting? What's going on in the world? As we all know, we've had a big impact lately, and that's, I think, really changed how we've delivered our programs and what our messaging is behind it. And so it's a lot of moving pieces, and that is to look at, that I think we all wish that we had more time to dedicate to, but they're really, really important. And I think too, having a philosophy behind what you are using to guide your programs is really helpful for whatever works for your organization. And so what are you committing to doing? What are you saying you're going to use for guidance is really helpful as well.
Thanks so much, Kim. And yeah, you're right. There's a lots of different approaches out there, and how do you go about kind of drawing from the different places, especially when we serve so many different audiences. Judy, I'm going to come to you because I know that you've been working extensively on different behavior change approaches. So, I think many people might be thinking, oh, where do I start? It is hard. I don't have time. Have you got any top tips for where people might start thinking about, well, where am I going to draw from different theories? Where am I going to, have a philosophy behind my conservation education?
The behavior change is such a big topic now, and everyone's talking about it in so many different ways. And I think back to the first presentations I gave on behavior change. And sure, that was so complicated. And I presented 15 different theories that people could look at. And I realized, thinking back now, it was complete overkill, because by the end of it, all people were coming out with was the fact that, my goodness, I don't think I can ever go into this behavior change stuff because it's so complicated. So I'm trying to really, really simplify the way we approach behavior change and look at some very simple theories. So we work a lot with the Doug McKenzie Moore's side of community-based social marketing. That I find a very useful methodology. And then working with some of the methodology that's come out of Behavior Works. And then just really simple things like the theory of planned behavior. So some of the older behavior change theories, I think are the best. And you can get more and more complex. But we've actually narrowed it down to some of the simplest theories. And that's what we're based on now. And I think that the only message that I really want to say about behavior change is that knowledge does not equal action. So if at the end of any of our training, people come out with that, then at least we've achieved one thing, because we still keep going in with all of our knowledge in the hope that we're going to achieve something. And then I think that really critically, every audience is different. Every family is different. Every unit is different, and being open to the different things that are going to inspire people in different ways. With Penguin Promises, we found that the live animals were really, really inspirational. And that was one of the reasons that people kept their promises 18 months to a year, 2 years later. So that was a really important thing. So depending on your context, you're tailoring your program all the time. And then I can't emphasize enough the importance of evaluation. Measuring, knowing what you want to achieve at the beginning and then measuring at the end. I think we are so good at just doing stuff because we are doers. That's our job. But that measuring at the end, how effective have we been, I think is something that we're still struggling with. And I think that it's part of the other chapters, but certainly something important. So I think that in terms of theories, keeping your theories very simple, especially when you're working with your team so that they can understand the theories you're working on, and then making sure you measure something at the end of it once you've been through the whole process.
Thanks, Judy. And I remember a similar experience when I started in zoos. my director was like, you've got to change people's behavior. And I was like, okay, what are these behaviors and who are these people and how will I know that they've changed? And so it was that amorphous just behavior change as one thing. Whereas, you know, we know a lot more about behavior change, and also we know some of the enabling factors. So I'm going to give an example at Auckland Zoo, where we spent the last year really promoting and supporting and nurturing both our audience's connection to nature and also their well-being, because there's a lot of science to say that if people are well, feeling good, functioning well, and are connected to nature, they're more likely to take on conservation action. And certainly the kind of, when we talk to our communities after the lockdown periods, after, you know, such a long time in the pandemic, we felt it was quite tone deaf to go straight in with, you know, quite a sharp behavior change campaign. So we said, what can we do? This is a way that we can have an approach, a long-term approach, to really support and nurture both the well-being of our communities as part, you know, coming to the zoo, connecting to the zoo as part of their reparation and recovery from the past couple of years, get them connected to nature, feeling those connected moments. And then that lays the foundation for thinking about what kind of behaviors, what kind of social change we'd like to start having conversations with our community. So absolutely what you're saying is, you know, for people who are with us now and listening at home, yes, there is a lot out there. As Kim said, there's, you know, we all want more time to kind of investigate further. The good thing is that there is a lot more out there in terms of this connected network. So if you are thinking about what kind of papers, what kind of theories, there's a whole bunch in our bibliography in the conservation education strategy. There's a lot out there that you can connect to through your different networks. And so don't feel that you're alone with this. And of course, the board are here if you have any questions. So Deborah, we're going to come to you next, because, you know, we're talking about these underpinning theories. You know, thinking about the work that you were doing, how did you start thinking, you know, you were having your internal philosophy, say, when you worked at San Diego Global, but where did you draw those external kind of theories and policies and frameworks from to really enrich how you approach conservation education?
Yeah, I want to just take one step back, because I on the social change, if you don't mind, because I think a lot of people make the mistake, they go in and do this full bore campaign and they haven't got buy-in internally, and it's so complex, it really doesn't work. So I'll just give you an example, because we just had resistance internally on this social behavioral change, even though we had hired someone, we did the research, we actually created a paper, I mean, the whole 9 yards. So we came up with the idea, the Endangered Species Act. There was a lot of talk about repealing it under the previous administration. So what we did was we printed 25,000 cards so people could very easily just sign their name and say, you know, I support the Endangered Species Act. And we distributed the cards to both the San Diego Zoo and the Safari Park. And it blew my mind. And we did an online version. Those cards were gone in a week. So it just showed, it was a great demonstration. The cards actually work better than the online, even though we did a whole big social media campaign on it. So it was able to show the administration that people are interested in taking action, and that they needed to work with us so that we could get a stair-step level approach to really then long-term getting a behavioral change campaign in. And just to let you know, that was like 3 years ago, and the zoo still doesn't have a big campaign. So you gotta, you know, you're gonna see for some of us, you're gonna have ups and downs as you're trying to get this implemented. Because it is a big change. It is such a big change. I mean, if you look at the philosophy of interpretation and education at most of our facilities, it's kind of turning things upside down. So I don't want people to get frustrated, and just realize you just got to take it one step at a time. So then back on to your question, you know, how do you draw in? Can you ask it again now? I'm sorry.
Oh no, I think you know what you're talking about really says that you know you have the internal stakeholders, and actually on that I think there's a bit of behavior change, a relationship change, mindset change within our own, you know, our internal kind of colleagues as much as it is to our audiences that we connect to. And so you're absolutely right that if, you know, if we say, oh yes, we need to change people's behavior, but if we haven't got the kind of the right people in the room, we haven't had those good conversations, we're not all on the same page, again linking back to chapter 1, the culture of conservation education, that one person can have this most brilliant plan, but it doesn't get that buy-in and the kind of you know, the whole zoo approach to it. I guess what I was asking about is, you know, you talked about the Endangered Species Act, that really kind of helped to shape some of your messages and your outcomes. But are there any other things that you use to be able to kind of have your conservation education?
That's a really good question. I think that one of the things that was really successful for us is when an issue was global, and the thing that really stands out were the fires in Australia. That really, there was a lot of interest in there. People actually, our supporters and donors asked, what can we do? So we did a dual approach. We did an on-grounds interpretive approach. So we wrote our key messages. We developed temporary interpretive panels. We had an Australian exhibit at the zoo and the safari park. We took these panels and we posted them at both sites. And then those messages were used by all the interpreters, you know, the bus drivers, the tram drivers, and the education department. And what still amazes me is we raised $1 million using that same messaging. Again, the communications team and the interpretive team used the same message. We really pulled people's heartstrings. We had great messages because we were also investing in conservation projects on the ground in Australia on both the koala and the platypus. So I think that sometimes, you know, I always say when opportunity knocks, make sure you open the door. And when
Judy,
you have these conservation things that come up, you know, we're all overworked, but, you know, take a step back, maybe delay something else and take that opportunity.
Yeah, great points. Judy, I could see your hand was up. Do you want to add some thoughts?
My question on this sort of thing is, how do we build a connection between what happened in Australia with the fires? So the response is really easy, we'll donate some money. Whereas the deeper systemic issue talks to climate change, it talks to all of us on planet Earth. How do we take that step? Because I've given my money, I've saved a koala, now I'm fine, I can go back to my SUV. How do we take that step? Because that's the most difficult thing, because often with Penguin Promises, we had the byline, we don't want your money, honey, we want your love. Because we didn't want it to be a fundraising campaign. We wanted it to be a behavior change campaign. So how do we link the money side, which is often an important fix, with the behavior side? So that's something that we're struggling with now, still with penguins.
Yeah, I think that, you know, one of our 3 key messages where you can help abate the challenges of climate change, and gave, you know, it's pretty much, you know, we're all using the same thing verbatim, but hopefully they're going to hear those same messages, you know, over and over again, whether it be, you know, use your car less, you know, think about the next time you buy a car, think about an electric car. So, you know, there's a whole long list, and we made sure that was one of the 3 key messages, and that, again, all the interpretives share there. It's like, you know, our climate is changing, but it's not hopeless. you could make a contribution by, reducing your carbon footprint. And it's not really that hard.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it, that our society, certainly with the Australian bushfires, was very much, I need to do something. That was like, I want to knit a jumper for a koala, or I want to kind of give money, and that immediate and urgent, the emergency kind of side of climate change, because it's real, it's tangible, it's in a specific area, it's finite. I think people can cope with that more than they can have the very grey, long-term, involves everybody climate situation. I'd be really interested, Deborah, for your thoughts about how the audiences gave money to the fires in Australia, but then in California, you have a lot of fires as well. And so were they making the connections and I know you do a lot of Californian conservation projects. So how do we make that link between, I'll give some money to faraway places and feel good that I've done something, through to, is there something I can do practically right now to be able to support my own local environments against the kind of things that I'm seeing in Australia?
Well, that is a brilliant question, because when we put together the interpretive plan for Walkabout Australia at the safari park, that's exactly what we did. The theme was climate change is affecting us all worldwide, and Southern California and Australia are facing the same challenges. So when you go through this Australia exhibit, we bring up the California examples, and in all of the programming that we do, we made those that link between Southern California fires, Australia fires. We're both facing the same thing. Drought is a real issue, and it is going to continue to get worse unless we all pitch in and start making some changes.
Thank you. Fantas, I'm going to come to you, because a lot of what we just talked about involves, I'm going to say, quite hopeless situations. In the chapter, it talks about conservation optimism. And so thinking about some of the issues that you and the organization, your community are connected with, how do you keep it positive? How do you kind of connect them with some very serious environmental and conservation issues, but really try and frame it in a positive, solution-focused way?
Yes, and I want to still refer back to the Education Center, which is one of the main tools that I use for communication. And in the designing of the exhibits at the Education Center, one of the things I want to reflect about were the conservation issues that really relate to our communities. And to start from the communities, as then look global, and one among the things by then, which are still issues that affect the environment today, are waste management concerns, issues to do with land degradation, either because of overgrazing or deforestation. Then we had issues to do with the wildlife, lack of habitat for the wildlife. And in the designing of the exhibits, two of the key things that I have put in the room is I've been able to put a tree in the room with litter, because it's a very common scenario in the landscape in the dry areas of northern Kenya, whereby papers by then were being flown and stuck on the trees at Adoni. And I really presented that as a case that people need to know that such situations are common in the environment, and with a question, who can we really blame for this? And I think that was my initial thought during the development of that poster. And with time and other engagement, we felt that the other solution to that poster should be, who can provide the solution to this situation in the environment, whereby we are creating a situation that the communities can reflect on as a problem in the environment. But again, we are helping them realize that the solution to that problem can only come with them. And then the question is, who can provide the solution to the situation that is very common in the environment? And in that poster, we have returned water, returned market centers, and these are the photos taken from market centers, and many people would always relate to that centers and they say, I think this is my village, in a way that they can own up the return. This was in 2012. But again, in 2015, the government turned a polythene ban in the country, which was really enacted as a law that we don't allow polythene papers. And today, when people come and see the same poster, they are able to see a situation that is very different from what happened, or that the situation that was there in 2012, 2011. So the same poster is relevant in a way that when you tell them that was the situation in 2012, and now that it is very difficult to see such a scenario, then they still can believe that with the human intervention, it is very easy to transform our environment from worse to good. The other thing that I've been able to use was a large mural, which is 11 meters, with a well-conserved environment and a poor conserved environment, showing a degraded environment and a well-kept environment, and we engage our communities and the learners to really appreciate the benefits of a well-conserved environment and the challenges one would experience if it never took care of the environment. And in this case, we want the audience to look at a situation that is not well kept, has a lot of challenges. But if we take care of the environment, then we have an environment that is able to provide more resources. And normally, because we use participative approach, students look at the poster, they analyze the benefits, they analyze the challenges. The last question I asked to them is that in the two sections of that mural, which side would you prefer to live if it was just a landscape that you are sent to live? And everybody will say the well-kept environment. And the other engagement would do, what efforts do you think we can do to be able to transform our environment into this beautiful environment? And if we are continuing to continue with deforestation, then what we desire, we are not going to achieve. So one is participative, the other thing is creating scenario that is live and that relates to their immediate environment.
Thank you so much, Avantas. You covered so many kind of points in the chapter, thinking about making those participatory experiences, getting people to critically think and have conversations, and really feeling that they're having that active dialogue and decision making about their role in conservation action. I do think that as zoos and aquariums have evolved, when I started 20 years ago, it was just tell people about the wonders of the natural world. And it was very much like tell people how awful it is and how, we've only got this many years with this species, whereas now we're really in a, there's been a turn into that positive action, that solution focus. And all that you're saying is how can everybody feel that they play a part? It's not the role of the zoo. We don't want to play the superhero, just leave it to us and we'll do it. It's actually like a whole society approach. And that's one of the reasons why we chose social change for conservation, because it is about including everybody in this movement. So we have 15 minutes to go. We've had some great conversations so far. If anybody does have any questions to ask our panel, please pop them in the chat or raise your hand. While we're thinking about some questions, Kim, I'm going to come to you because looking at the other items in our chapter, there's a couple that we haven't covered. We're going to get on to kind of a bit around evaluating and measuring. But I really want to talk about innovation because for me, there is a really interesting relationship. As Judy says, we've focused on doing the do quite a lot, and we spend a lot of time kind of focused on the day-to-day, especially in the last couple of years when we've had to kind of be quite reactive to a very tricky situation. But when we're thinking about making those changes, connecting to those audiences, innovation to me plays a huge part in our practice. And so I just wanted to get from you, Kim, what are your approaches to have innovation within your team? How do you support that? How do you think about those new and wonderful ideas and approaches that might cause a different impact or connect to a different audience?
So I think that's a really interesting question, Sarah, because I think a lot of times when people think innovation, they think technology. And, we do live, we're in the 21st century. There's a lot of technology, but unfortunately, technology can also disconnect you from the natural world. So I think it's finding that balance in what is a strategic way to do it within our capabilities, so thinking innovatively, if we are leading a vet program or talking about vets as a career and supporting animals, and we can talk about the challenges that face animals, and so then how do we use technology to integrate that? So maybe it's taking a large stuffed plush sea turtle, creating some sort of doing some sewing magic and having a tube that can go down, and then you can actually have kids send an endoscope down to find the plastic bags and pull it out of that turtle stomach. So it's authentic learning. It can be innovative. It's technology that the kids are connecting with, but it's talking about those examples of here are some challenges that are facing those worlds. I also do think sometimes too we have to be creative because technology often costs money. And, we all know that zoos, aquariums, conservation, we want to put our money maybe not towards tech. And so thinking about what can we do that's a little bit different, using maybe some low tech solutions. And that's really key too of what is out there. It doesn't always have to be technology. So like Deborah was saying earlier, Nafantis, keep it simple. Sometimes the basic is really the way to go. It doesn't have to be splashy and fancy. And so don't get so caught up in that you're kind of losing sight of what is possible with maybe some, I don't know, plastic fruit as an example, potentially. Who knows what's out there. So bringing multiple voices to the table, I think too, who knows, what people are going to be able to contribute to the conversation.
Thanks, Kim. Afantis, I see you've got your hand up. What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, I wanted just to make a point that Kim has mentioned. In my last article on the IZD journal, I mentioned about how we are blazing technology to help reach out to schools to enable them actually learn conservation as they learn their school curriculum. And one of the things that we did is that much of the exhibits development at the Conservation Education Center and in our programs engagement, we also try to create value to the national curriculum in a way that the students, when they participate, they don't see it or feel as if it is lessons away from their normal learning, but it's a lesson that really adds value to their national curriculum. And one of the things we realize is that while we were digitizing the content, the digital content for the national curriculum, we felt that some of the examples on water conservation, challenges on the environment that we needed to include were those that related to various environments, so that wherever the teachers are using technology, which you are able as LEWA to deliver to our schools that we support around the communities, the teachers are now able to use technology to demonstrate some environmental situations. And in this way, we are now using technology to be able to get the students learn about those things that they are not easily accessible in the school environment. So I just wanted to just echo what really Kim mentioned about technology use in linking the students to conservation aspects.
Thanks, Afantis. And yeah, go on, Kim.
I was gonna say, I just want to jump back in here too, talking about being innovative. And one of my colleagues has been working, and I'm going to misspeak, so please forgive me, but he's been working with one of our local universities about the difference between VR versus just interactive on a computer. Do students need the VR goggles, or can they still immerse themselves? And where it's been really interesting is that I think we always think it has to be VR, and the students have said, nah, not necessarily. And so using that tech in creative ways. And I think they're going to publish the article soon, but I just wanted to mention that too, of like, there's a lot of studies out there and using resources to think about what else is available. Thank you, Sarah, for letting me chime back in.
No, I know, we always have this where we could actually spend a whole hour talking about innovation and what that means. For me, I think that it's how do we create space for innovation, both from a technology point of view and a mindset point of view. I know that when I worked at the Zoological Society of London, we were very fortunate to have an innovation pot, and we had great conversations about things that we wanted to try. There was no kind of assumption that it was going to work, but that was part of our kind of practice, saying, here are things that we want to try because we want to see and we want to be able to kind of test things out. And I do think that many zoos and aquariums would benefit from that. It's quite a difficult thing to set up because I think we have the assumption that we want to have something that's done and works and has that impact. Whereas, if we're trying to kind of put many kites up and see which ones stay up, then that's a very different kind of way of thinking about our conservation education. But to me, a conversation about how you think the relationship between research and theory, about practice, about what you do day to day, and about innovation is really important. And there's a section in the strategy which kind of just talks about that and calls it out in that space. So I see we've got about 7 minutes left. I'm going to come to Deborah and Judy to talk about measurement and evaluation, because we've had a great conversation about all sorts of different approaches, all sorts of different things that we do in our conservation education careers. But actually, Judy talked about this, saying, but it's really important to think about not only the approach, but how is that connected to how you're going to measure, how are you going to look at the impact it's creating, and how do you kind of frame the evaluation right at the very beginning to make sure that it is connected to the outcomes. And so, Deborah, I can see you're off mute, so we'll start with you. What are your thoughts on this?
Evaluation, it's a hard reality, and there's so few institutions, even in the United States, that I know that have an evaluator on staff. I always thought that at the world famous San Diego Zoo, that sooner or later, if I just did enough justifications, we would have one. We never did in all the years I was associated with them. So I think you have to be realistic. So you can go about it a few different ways. You can provide training for someone on your team to get some evaluation experience. So that's one of the things I did. Paid for coursework for an individual. And then I also had a consultant. And then you have to prioritize, what do you need to evaluate? Because you can't afford to evaluate everything. So the number one thing we evaluated were our new habitats. So anytime we created a new habitat and we did the messaging, we had the evaluator at the table right at the beginning. And that evaluator went through with us all throughout the process. And we were able to convince management to put that in the budget, the big budget, as part of the interpretive package. So, and then for the other things we thought needed to be evaluated, again, it's all prioritization and how much uptime did the internal staff member have to help us on the other, evaluating the other programs. I just wish I could say it was wonderful and we evaluated everything. It was like, you probably looked at the end, we were lucky to evaluate, 5 to 8%, just being realistic.
Yeah. Nancy, I see your hand is up. Let's go over to you.
I was recently reading that, in conservation, we're really good at research, but we're really crap at measuring and analyzing. But it's so valuable, especially for funding. I don't know if it's a catch-22. It's like, to get the funding, we need the research, we need to analyze and measure the importance of what we're doing. But to do that, we need the funding. So I'm just curious why there hasn't been more focus on financing measurement, because without it, we're not necessarily getting the funding for the conservation projects and issues that we're trying to do.
That is an excellent question, Nancy. Judy, do you want to have some thoughts on that?
I think it is a really good question. And a quote that I love is, hope as in here's hoping it works is not an evaluation strategy. Because I think that's often what we do, is we just do it and we hope that it's going to work. But I found it really, really hard to embed an evaluation mindset in both education teams I've worked with. We are so busy doing and being and improving and all the rest of it, but we just can't. I found it really hard, as Deborah said, to get people to say, no, evaluation is what you plan from the very beginning. So Nancy, to talk to your point, I think that the funding issue is actually a benefit. So if you're not going to get any money unless you evaluate, there's a great incentive to evaluate. So I think that maybe we can see how we can use that funding issue as part of the incentive to actually do that evaluation. And that's the kind of route I'm now trying to take at Two Oceans, is look at when we apply for funding, we build evaluation into the application right at the very beginning, because then it's not a nice to have, it's part of the process. So I'm trying to use it almost in a backwards way. The programs that are already funded by the aquarium and have been running for 100 years, I'm really finding it hard to get people to say, well, now we need to evaluate. They say, but we do the checklist at the end and people fill the form in. And well, that's not really evaluation. But we've been doing it like this forever and everyone loves it. Yes, I know, but... So I think that we're going to have to do a better job at selling evaluation and selling its impact and its value. But I think that from what you're saying, Nancy, if we can build it into our funding grant so that it's not a choice, it's a have to, maybe that's a route in. So yeah, I would love to say we've done all the evaluation, just as Deborah said. We've done selected research projects. So I found that easier. So I'm not talking evaluation, I'm talking research. So we're going to do a proper research program on our Marine Protected Areas exhibit, and we're going to write it up as a paper, we're going to publish it. And I found that a route to really measure our effectiveness in certain programs. But routine evaluation of specific programs, I'm still searching for the Holy Grail on that one too.
Yeah, and it's Nancy, I would say that it is a circular, it keeps going round again, like every few years. Why are we not kind of putting more attention on to research and evaluation in zoos and aquariums? As Deborah's saying, you know, even large institutions don't seem to have the same attention. I think that's probably changing. What was interesting for me when I started it, you know, a lot of the concerns about zoos and aquariums was around animal welfare, and they weren't really thinking about the social outcomes of conservation education. Whereas now there's a lot of focus on, you know, our social license to operate, our kind of ability to demonstrate the connection and the work that we do with our communities. And so that's where I think that certainly this document is helping, you know, by saying that zoos and aquariums who are signing up and committing to being part of the global zoo community, there are 4 recommendations that connect to research and evaluation. And this is the first time we've actually had a roadmap to saying this is what we need zoos and aquariums to do. The other side of it for me is making sure that people feel that you don't have to have a PhD in social science to evaluate. And I think it really is kind of breaking the fear of what evaluation is, and how, as Judy was saying, getting into the mindset, getting into the kind of day-to-day practice. As we talked about before, we talk about behavior change and social change with our audiences. I do actually think there's quite a lot of that in our institutions as well, about where evaluation and research fits and how much it needs to be kind of quite a core pillar of what we do. Judy, I saw your hand was up, so I'm going to pop over to you before we kind of finish.
Just very quickly, I think that sitting at WZACES conferences, sitting at IZD conferences, wherever we communicate about zoos and aquariums, we talk about our impact through our visitors. And we still do not really have something that is clear and concrete that says this is our impact. We've got pockets of it, but we have to expand that if we're going to be really truthful about what we're really doing. We're doing the conservation stuff, we're doing the animals. Those animals are in our exhibits, in our facilities, to connect to people, to achieve a goal, and we have to measure that goal, I think, far better.
Absolutely, Judy. And certainly over the next 4 years as you as president, I'm sure we're going to make some kind of inroads into that. We're on the hour. So what I'm going to ask is any of our kind of panelists, any final thoughts, anything that you want to share that we haven't done? Other than that, we'll kind of close. So Kim, over to you.
I just want to point out too that we're talking about evaluation, and we're very centered right now, the conversation on kind of the outcomes of our programs. And I think we need to make sure we also don't forget that evaluation happens at multiple steps. There's the pre-assessment evaluation of determining, what is your program going to look like? There's evaluating your program before you even present it. So we are focused on the behavior change and the evaluation there, but I think there's a lot of opportunity for evaluation at other steps in the process. Sarah, we started out the conversation talking about how do you ensure the quality of your program. And so we actually have an internal rubric that we look at, just looking at the program on paper of like, is this meeting, what we've said is our mission, our conservation message? Is it meeting our sustainability goals? Are we having glitter and a craft for a craft's sake, or is there a purpose behind this craft? So I don't want to diminish the post-program evaluation, because of course behavior change and conservation change is absolutely critical, but evaluation is so much bigger than just that one piece.
Absolutely, Kim. And we've got a whole reading group on that in a few months, so we'll definitely come back and have that conversation. Thanks, Kim. Anything from you, Deborah, to close us out?
Yeah, I would just say after the discussion, since this is conservation, don't go down the doom and gloom rat hole. I remember when I started working at the Orangutan Foundation, people said, those orangutans are going to be extinct in 10 years in the wild, and we're not going to put any time and energy in Sumatran orangutans because they're going to go extinct first. Well, neither of them went extinct. And I think yes, we have a lot of challenges, but the sky is not falling, and we have to really position things in a hopeful way, or we're just shooting ourselves in the foot.
Thanks, Deborah. Afantis, anything from you to close us out?
Nothing much, and I'm happy to have, I think I shared a link to somebody, and now he's appearing as a phantasm, and he has been commenting, and I think I really appreciate the feedback from the other phantasm in the screen. Cannot see the face, but I really appreciate. I don't have much really to comment, but definitely technology is one of the areas that I'm very keen.
It is Margaret.
Okay, Margaret, I'm very happy, and we'll be happy, I think, to hear from you, because I think it's appearing as my name. Please, maybe you can give it another just to give a bit of feedback.
Okay, thank you so much for this opportunity, and thank you for reminding me about this session. It's been very exciting, because the kind of discussions that we've held tonight are things that have also been in my mind a lot, especially when it comes to M&E and learning, and really being sure that you are monitoring and evaluating the conservation education that we are delivering, and also just thinking about the methods that we use to teach conservation education. So I found these discussions very, very enriching, and I'm grateful. I'm glad as I stayed awake. Thank you.
Great. And I see Judy has to run because we're over time, but thank you so much, Judy. I'm just going to say thanks to everybody. Great conversation as always, and check out our next sessions that we've got in the new year. So thanks, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Sarah, for leading this great session. Much appreciated. Happy holidays, everyone.